Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, there is a new sound system, so I'll have to adjust the volume of my voice. But good afternoon and welcome to the council meeting of 19th of March 2019. Just a reminder that the meeting is being live streamed and will be available on YouTube, so remember to speak clearly into the microphone, although that's perhaps not as necessary as it has been with the previous system. We're going to start the council meeting with a minute's silence as a result of the terrorist event or the mass murder that took place in Christchurch. Just before we do have that, I'll just mention that there's been a number of events, spontaneous public events really, that have taken place in the city since that terrible event on Friday. And I want to thank everybody that actually organised those events. I was able to go to the mosque on Saturday and meet the president, Mr. Ahmed Ghanem, and have a chat with him. And of course, many Tauranga people had put flowers and notes and things on the fence all around the mosque in Tauranga South. Then that night, immediately after visiting him, a lady had organised a small gathering in Yatton Park. 30 people, and they were floating candles on the pond. It was a very peaceful scene, and then from there over to Mount Main Beach, and I don't know, 500, 1,000 people maybe. It was a big crowd by Motoriki, and once again that had been organised spontaneously. And then last night, Holy Trinity Church also organised an event. It was a large crowd of people, and about 150 or so of the Muslim community from Tauranga were also present. All those things were different, and they were all meaningful in different ways. So that was really good. Some of the things that I said, I'll just repeat briefly. But I think that when we try and examine why this sort of thing was able to happen in New Zealand, it's very difficult to comprehend a terrorist act taking place here, because it's something we always see happening overseas. Sort of thought we were immune, but somehow we were probably never immune from bigotry. We just didn't think it would reach that violent conclusion. But when we think about it and we look around, and especially on things like social media, we do notice an increasing number of people with conspiracy theories, hatred, not too veiled threats of violence, and you can find that on a variety of pages, and dare I say it, possibly even local ones. And so it doesn't seem enough these days for people to have express differences of opinion, which are then the subject of a civilised debate. It seems that some people just have to go further and go to extremes. And simple differences can turn into outrage, hot-headed insults, and violent tirades. So I think that from my personal point of view, at the same time as we're getting rid of things like semi-automatic weapons, we need to reset our tolerance levels. And the old adage that many of us probably grew up with was live and let live. That expresses the idea that we should all tolerate the opinions and expressions of others, and they then in turn will tolerate our different idiosyncrasies and differences. So I sort of thought, and I expressed that view last night, imagine a world in which we could agree or disagree, but not be disagreeable. So, and then I also went on to thank the people tasked with maintaining law and order, in particular the police, and who chose to chase down the offender and had the tools necessary to capture him as well. And I thought on behalf of the community I wanted to offer our support to the police, because they don't always get it. And I just reiterated what the Prime Minister had said, that this is not New Zealand, it is not who we are. And I probably went on to say that we mustn't let this sort of crime win by letting it define our lives. So mentioned that a lot of people in situations like this think, well, what can we do? And there's probably not a lot that you can do unless you are wanting to donate money to used to them. But what people can do is gather and express their thoughts and opinions, and not everybody can get to a visual service to do that either, so they often talk to friends or family or work colleagues about that, and I think that has the same effect. And on Friday night I was able to fire off a quick email to the Mayor of Christchurch and did get a reply the next day saying that the people of Christchurch are given strength by knowing the rest of New Zealand stands with them. So when people say, well, what can you do? You can stand with people. So, and then I did, when I was speaking last night, just to finish off with the words, a member of the Christchurch Islamic community, I found it on a media website, and words that were addressed to the attacker, and it said, well, the words of this person said, "You have broken so many hearts and you have made the world weep. You've left a huge void. But what you have also done has brought us closer together, and it has strengthened our faith and resolve. You may have achieved your aim of intended destruction, but I guess you failed to incite hatred, fear and despair. You made countless New Zealanders come out of their homes to visit the mosques nearest to them with flowers and beautiful messages of peace and love." So, on that note, I thought we would just stand for a minute's silence in memory of the victims, their families, and in solidarity with the people of Christchurch. So just calling for apologies, I'll just move the apology of Councillor Clout, who's away on other council business, but we'll need another second to Councillor Kurak. So all in favour say aye. So that's carried. There's no public forum requests today, and I don't believe there are any late items. So no change to order of business unless anybody has a request there. Okay. And looking at declarations of, we're going to do the minutes first and then declarations of conflicts of interest. So looking at the minutes, Council 21st of February. Any questions on that first? Somebody prepared to move the true and correct? We received them. Yep, moved by Councillor Baldock, second by Councillor Mason. Any further discussion on that? So all in favour say aye. Against, so that's carried. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? Okay, so going on to the business proper, and the first one is DC 57, which is the Tsunami Response Review Update. So, is that Margaret, are you going to? Oh, okay, Julian and Phil speak to that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our emergency management team are currently reviewing a number of critical emergency management response areas. One of these that they're looking at is aspects of tsunami readiness. The paper that Phil and Julian are going to talk to you about today is an opportunity to give you an overview of some of the areas that we are looking at in our review. A more detailed paper will come back to you with more concrete thinking in terms of our recommendations, and once our thinking is complete in June, that will come back to you. So I'll pass you over to Julian and Phil.
Thank you, Margaret. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. Phil Parker, Emergency Manager. We're presenting this general paper to you today on our tsunami readiness, and it's the first time that we've actually had a chance to give you an overreaching look at our tsunami tsunami readiness position. It's a heads up at the moment with a more depth report coming to you in the June meeting. So I'd hand you over to our Senior Advisor, Julian Rewati, to just address any points you have in the paper.
Your Worship, Councillors, this really is a snapshot of the overarching picture we want to bring to you in June. It really is split into two parts, this paper, and one part is just about the people, it's how we do things. So it's about the collaboration model we have, and it's also about the capability and capacity that TCC hold in its staff. So it's around all how we do it. The second part, which leads into the what do we do and the actions that are in particularly the LTP and the science behind all that. So this paper highlights just a couple of elements of that. And on the people side, there are reviews going on. So we are looking at that review with group because there were a lot of recommendations that came out of the events over the last few years. So that review is highlighted in there. On the other side of things that we do, the big things that are considered in your plan, it is timely just to have a refresh of that to see how they are fit for purpose and what strategy this council needs to go forward. So the science is changing, we're getting more updated science, and that leads us to start thinking about some of those risk models and to make sure that we are putting things in front of you that are continuing to be fit for purpose. So no decision required today, but we allude to things in this paper that we will bring back on the things and the actions. So happy to answer any questions.
Well, why not? No, I didn't put my hand up, but I do have a question. You must have been intuitive. I guess it's a question for either the consultants or staff, but once we go through the May meeting, then of course there's an annual plan decision. Annual plan budget becomes available from 1st of July. How quickly should council be of a mind to erect alerting mechanisms? How quickly would we be able to undertake that work?
Councillor, I can allude to that one. We are scoping out a number of these devices at the moment. My best guess is once we have the go-ahead, it would be about 6 months before we could get a device up and running.
Thank you. Through the chair, in our agenda on page 18, it refers to signage, and I'll just read what the quote is. Walking the routes with your family and neighbours in tow is considered one of the best ways to understand and prepare for a tsunami. And a little bit concerned with that statement because you're not necessarily going to have the tsunami where you live. It could be in a different city even. So I suppose my concern is that we have a consistent message, preferably throughout the country, with regard to tsunamis, etc. Is that something that you believe is going to happen or is happening?
Yes, Councillor, two elements to that. It is really important that the messaging around tsunami is consistent across New Zealand, so that we do know that the long and strong get gone is very much a mantra. We know there are issues around that in the latest GNS where there are some earthquakes that will be difficult because they won't have that same feeling that we all come to know, but the mantra is important. It is something that you try and get your kids to do and your families to do, and dare I say my mother-in-law to do. But it is something that we have to build as a consistent messaging. More importantly for Tauranga, we are in discussion. MBOP have held just recent pilot hikoi in Whakatane and Oporiki, much smaller scale. but we're just talking with them now about how do you translate that to the Tauranga situation. It's much more dense, very difficult to try and think about, but it can be done in small pockets. I think the message is really clear. The best practice you can do in this environment to actually walk those routes that are out there will be the best mechanisms for the community to learn. Information's great, but walking the walk is what they've found in Japan works. It's really much a practical situation. So there's lots of ways of doing that, but we're in discussion with NWOP around that.
And if I can just ask one other question through the chair, you mentioned about science is changing. Can you just elaborate more on that comment, please?
Probably two elements. Again, one very local. We do know aerial mapping has been updated for Tauranga. That's really important in many facets of council's thinking. It does give you a real-world picture of what's out there, specifically in developed areas that you didn't have in 2012 and 14. So you can now retest some of the assumptions around some of the detail. So that's number one, which we want to look at. The second part is more the harder parts that have come out recently when you think at a bigger scale. GNS, the Geological Nuclear Science, have come up with earthquakes aren't all the same. That has an influence, and the science needs to catch up. So those issues have to be brought into mind when you develop your strategies going forward as a council. So I've tried to allude to those particular things, and we will bring more detail around that.
Thank you. Just concerned about the IADs, that the recommendation is to invest in or to follow through with the alerting system on the mobile phones, and you know, I can't quite understand that rationale, given that a phone won't wake you up in the middle of the night if you've turned it on to silent, which most people do. I'm encouraged that we're still monitoring what Coromandel are doing. Can you comment on that, just to give us some comfort that we're not shutting the door on that, because I understand there's been some further issues that, you know, as you investigate become problems, but we need a system that is going to, more than one system, and we're going to need to make sure we can help particularly the elderly in their sleep to be able to alert them.
Yes, Councillor, that's quite correct. We've also got to be aware that we're not putting ourselves out there as a standalone, so we're working with National on this, so we're also viewing the National program. McDem are very conscious that the phone alerting system is the number one they want to go with. They're speaking with communications organisations at the moment to make sure that most of the country has good coverage for this area, so that's where they're pointing number one. We did look, and we still are looking at alternative options. The IAD is certainly one, and we haven't totally walked away from it. But I think, to be fair, it's at a very early stage, and for us to completely commit at that, it's my opinion that we would be exposing ourselves a little bit until we've got more detail on it. So we're certainly going down that track to get more detail for you, along with other devices that you may have seen in the report.
There is a difference, you know, relying on the mobile phones means that the phone network, which could be disrupted by an earthquake, whereas the other, which works on radio waves, perhaps may be a bit more resilient to a quake. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, that is quite fair comment.
Councillor Brown and then Granger.
Thank you. In the report around 24, 25, you've referred to the vertical evacuation structures, and I sort of detect that there may, that the scope of that or the need for that may be changing, given the words otherwise needed or otherwise. We've got a significant amount of money in our annual plan and our long-term plan for those structures. Given you're coming back to us in May, will we have all the information we need to make the right decisions in May that may affect our budget on those VES structures?
There will be some, there's a real focus in this area in terms, and the reason why we highlight that is there is some risk. I mean, it is about risk management, risk assessments. So those assessments we are undertaking in line with particularly the aerial mapping, for example, gives you a real world picture out there. That and may influence some of the detail on the early assumptions about the impact in particular areas. Just how far we get with that in that detail, how deep we really need to go in some of that assessment, we're going to have to work pretty quickly and strongly through that. So at this stage, we believe that there'll be some need to reconsider the LTP funding around that, but we'll have to wait until the June meeting until I can get the detail collated together.
Thank you for that. And just listening to you before in regards to the New Zealand National, and it sounds the preference is the number one is the phone system. I understand there's quite a few cities throughout New Zealand that have been quite proactive, and some have gone to the extent of using external sirens. Are you keeping up with what's happening there and research on those as well?
Yes, Councillor, we are. You'll also notice in the report that we have touched on alerting and local level sirens. We're scoping that right now as we speak, and I would hope to have a comprehensive report for you on that at the June meeting, with options that you may consider.
Thanks, guys, for that delivery. I was sort of aware that nearly 2 years ago now, I think it was, maybe a bit under, that I thought we'd come to an arrangement where between telephone and the external sirens, I forget what to call them, that we'd virtually agreed that that was the way we should go. I don't know what's happened since. I'm aware of a lot of good work that's happened in this area, but I'm also aware that as long as I've been on council, we've been wrestling with this issue, and it's been in excess of 10 years. So we're taking a while to come to a decision, and potentially putting our community at risk. But anyway, what we'd agreed upon, I think 2 years ago, can you elaborate on that a bit and why we haven't carried it through?
Yes, Councillor. So as you're probably aware, both Gillian and myself are fairly new to this organisation. We are picking up the projects that have been sitting on the table, and in the last couple of months we've been working right through Objective to find out just what is sitting there. These are some of the projects that we have certainly found, and that's why we're trying to alert to you with this paper that that's where we want to go, and put the options for you so that you can make a decision in June rather than sit back and deliberate on it for another 10 years. So hopefully the information we'll give you in June, you will certainly be making some decisions.
If I could also comment, I think it was really important when we got here to stand back and see the suite of tsunami risk management that you have going, and bring the whole lot onto the table. Good, because some of this is about prioritising that. So it's an opportunity to bring the suite, and then you can more rationally think of your direction that you want to go and make that decision. So it is intended to come back for a decision on some of these elements in June.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the words of Councillor Malloy, but make the statement a bit stronger. When I stood for council in 2013, I publicly stated I wanted sirens. I do not resile from that position. I find it disturbing that we have people talking about risk when the risk, the big risk, is to the people on the coast. I look at the Japanese system that's been in place and the multiple channels it uses, and I look at their use of sirens, and I cannot believe that over 5 years since I wrote my election manifesto, we have not put sirens in place. There is no defence. We have no defence right now. I mean, the long, strong, get gone thing, we know that doesn't apply in all situations, right? There could be a wave on its way now. You know, I just don't understand where the risk analysis lies, which seems to be we may spend a few dollars without much return, and on the other side of that seesaw is dead people. You know, I'm struggling with this. I'm hoping that what comes back in May is very, very clear risk assessment with a budget for us to act. Because, you know, I'm not comfortable. Section 135 of the Companies Act doesn't cover this situation. No way.
Anybody prepared to move, and then we can speak to it? Yeah, Councillor Morris, seconded by Councillor Brown.
Speaking to it, you know, I look forward to the paper. Sorry, was it May or June? May in the written, but it's been subsequently confirmed as June. Look, there's been a long story here. 2006, there was a test of sirens the Council of the Day did, which was apparently unsuccessful in terms of the number and the people who could hear it. Then there was some further work done in about 2012 with an electronic system that was overturned in early 2014 because there was a condition to that system that there had to be a certain number of decibels heard within homes within Tauranga, and the cost blew out as a result. Then 2014 there was a decision made to prioritise evacuation routes, which has occurred, and that work has been done largely. Still some outstanding matters there. Over that triennium, there was an attempt to get the Bay of Plenty Civil Defence Emergency Management Group to pick up and lobby central government on our behalf. That took some doing to get the group to agree. My thanks to Mayor Chadwick of Rotorua, who really helped to push that through. Consequently, we now have a 24, well, maybe not consequently, but we now have a 24/7, 365 emergency operations centre in Wellington. That was the key missing part of any alerting mechanism. And then, of course, we tragically lost a staff member following the resolutions, I think, in 2017. But we're here now. There seems to have been one of the reasons for delays is this need to be consistent with things nationally. Now, and then of course we're talking in the report, well, maybe things actually need to be consistent regionally. My view is that we need to lead here and other people can be consistent with us, like we have done with the evacuation routes and the vertical evacuation structures. We lead, the rest of the country can follow. There has been, and in my view, one of the roadblocks has been this fear that, and it's called the levy effect. It's where you provide either a piece of infrastructure or an alerting mechanism, and if that fails, people are then more at risk because they're relying on it. And that kind of works in New Orleans with levees. People live in there because there's levees and they feel safe, and when the levee breaches, there's more deaths as a result. That's the levy effect. But in my view, it doesn't apply to something very simple, tsunami sirens, because let's look at buildings and fire hazards. If there is a fire in a building, we don't say to people, look, if you can smell smoke, then leave the building. You know, that's your only warning. Sorry, folks. And we're not going to put in fire alarms because someone might set one off by accident, and then, oh, hang on, we'll be responsible for a panic. So the focus, in my view, has been too much toward the people who may be responsible for pressing the button in error and not the actual people we're supposed to be protecting. So, yeah, you have fire alarms in buildings, you get false alarms occasionally, and actually the research shows that when there are false alarms, there isn't mass panic. And that's not just in Western countries, that's in all sorts of countries around the world. The evidence shows that there isn't mass panic and trampling and all that sort of thing when there is a false alarm. And we've had many recently up in Coromandel. I think there was even one in Opotiki as well, and nobody trampled anybody in those cases. So my view, let's do it now. Let's get on with it. Look forward to the paper in June. We lead the rest of the country. They can follow us. Let's not wait anymore for a consistent approach. We lead, we set the consistent approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It has been a very long journey, but we have achieved some things, and Councillor Morris has already alluded to those. This is something that we absolutely have to get right, because it is about risk and it is about lives, particularly pertinent about what happened on Friday. So we've got the clear routes and we've got the vertical evacuation structures. We've got signage throughout the whole city, which caters for visitors, not just locals. We've got maps that are delivered to every household in the city so that they know where they need to evacuate to. We've held practice days and open days, so we've encouraged and educated our community that that's what they do. The one thing they're missing now is that loud audible siren system that triggers that reaction to go to those routes and to go to a safe place. But we have already got a toolbox, and in that toolbox, my personal toolbox, I've got the GeoNet app, I've got the Quake Feed app. One of those does sound off when it's on silent. There's the Red Cross app, there's texting, there's email, there's radio, and there's social media. So there's already a lot of opportunity for people to be fully aware of what's going on. Just think that the sirens will actually complete that circle. And you're right, Steve, we need to lead this. But I also want to acknowledge Paul Bourton and his absolute passion for this, and it would be really great if we can do this for him as well as for our community.
When I spoke earlier, there was a whisper in my ear and said, question, what's the question? There was a question implicit in what I said. I will make the question explicit now. The question is, will this report give us the budget allocation required and the direction required to deliver what I think my two colleagues, at least one of them explicitly said, is required to complete the suite, right? Looking at what other people do in countries that have similar exposure, right? Sirens. Will the report give us the information required to actually act? Because if the report's not delivering that, we're failing. Another delay.
Yeah, that's high on our priority. Both Phil and I are working on that. We will provide the functionality, performance, the potential locations, and the costs.
Some time ago, and speaking in support of it, I did comment that sirens on their own were like an ashtray on a motorbike. They weren't a lot of use. But sirens coupled with a ocean warning device, a telephone or in-house device, and all the work that's been done around the evacuation routes, this needs to happen as quickly as we can, and whatever it costs, we don't have a choice. We've got to do it and do it quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, just through the conversation, I don't know that it's clear to councillors that we're commissioning an independent review on the current proposed suite and how they actually work and deliver the outcomes we're trying to achieve here. So I'm correct in saying that, aren't I? Yeah, by the Kestrel Group, who I guess are nationally renowned for civil defence emergency management reviews. In fact, they did the reviews on the response to both the Edgecombe and Wider Bay of Plenty floods 2 years ago, and springing out of that, they reviewed the interrelationship with both the regional council and the various districts, and so they seem well placed, in my view, to come in and have a look at what was proposed, because I don't know that what had been proposed had been either peer reviewed or independently assessed.
Yeah, look, as far as in regards to the suite you mentioned before, and especially external sirens, which I'm very interested in, beside the electronic sirens, are we looking at quite a number? And when I say that, are we looking at something very similar to the old World War II sirens? Is that on your list?
No, Councillor. The sirens that we're looking at now are extremely modern and robust. They're a voice-over siren. There are three options we're looking at, and we'll give you all three options. But one of the main sirens I think that would be suitable is a voice-over siren, similar to what they're using in the States. It's approved by FEMA in America, and it puts out, and we talked about decibels a minute ago, it meets all the requirements under the decibel and the warning for modern houses with double glazing. So that's the track we're going down, and it is also ideal for coastal environments.
Okay, just the point I'm trying to make here is that in the past, which I was involved, we did try so-called electronic sirens. I was involved also of trying the old World War II type siren. I think what was the model of that one, Steve? I can't remember. But anyway, it was based. Yeah, it was based on that. And one thing it did do that the people could hear it. And you say that the newer, fresher-looking ones today. You got to admit though that the ones of past are certainly proven, aren't they? So.
Unfortunately, the type of World War II siren, which we have around the country now, which is an electronic one, which the fire service are using, those are all being taken out in 2020. So they've had to look at new sirens, and unfortunately, what they have found on the coastal areas, those sirens are inclined to rust and seize up. These new ones that they're looking at now are designed so they won't do that, and we can silently test them so that we know if the speaker system's working or not, and they have some really, from what we've been told, they're really robust and have some good performance throughout the world, not only just in America.
Thank you. Through the chair, we definitely need those sirens. And I think the other thing to remember is educating the community. You can't just do it once and hope that people will retain the information. It's got to be an ongoing, regular thing. So look forward to that being programmed into our response as well.
Picking up, seeking some further clarity on Councillor Robson's question. In the LTP, there is a certain amount of budget for alerting mechanisms, both the in-home and outdoor. And we have a report coming to us in June in terms of a wider suite of measures that we do, but also a budget for outdoor alerting mechanisms. Now, my question is, will there be an internal submission from staff as part of Annual Plan 2019, which outlines some expenditure which we can approve potentially on this project, or is there sufficient budget within 1525 LTP that covers that? The real direct question is, are we within the next 6 months able to make a decision in which budget is then able to be spent and released and then spent, and the project is underway? Are we able to do that within the next 6 months?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, look, it would be my expectation that we have the current tsunami response plan reviewed, and that we provide council that review report essentially with a revised response plan with the accompanying expenditure required out throughout the term of the long-term plan to deliver it. And so there's about $6 million, as I understand, for tsunami response over the remaining 9 years of the long-term plan. In my view, that should be ample, I would have thought, to be able to stage and implement a logical tsunami response plan over that period. If not, we'll report back at that time to make some sort of adjustment. Yeah. So as Phil and Julian have had a closer look and tested some of the assumptions made in the response plan, the ability to be able to, I guess, deliver the in-house alerting systems and the physical construction of other structures, the practicality, it's not as simple or straightforward as one might have thought. And given the new GNS data, it's worthy and prudent, I think, just to check as to whether or not those projects, those proposals are still the best thing to do in terms of a community response plan.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Mayor. So, will it require a decision through the 2020-2021 annual plan to get started, or is there sufficient ability to get started after June should we seek some projects to get underway before then?
Yeah, it's our understanding there's plenty in there in the short term to deliver whatever we need to in the next year or two to set this plan in action.
Thank you. Yes, it may appear to some that this, has been going very slow and has not yet delivered the system. But if it was easy, we may have done it earlier. But it's been a huge project, and it is a huge investment for the safety of our community. And every now and again, you think you've got there, and then you get new science, which is what has just occurred. It wasn't long ago the long and strong get gone was, considered okay, and then suddenly we have new data that indicates we could have a tsunami generator without a large quake. So I'll be looking forward to the report. I think we have made decisions along the way, and we need to stick to those we've made when there hasn't been new evidence to revisit them, like not using World War II sirens, like having multiple systems, which we clearly made a decision about. We would not rely upon one alerting system. And whatever systems we put in place, we know we are still reliant upon someone to push the button, which, when we began this process, we discovered New Zealand didn't have a 24/7, person sitting there ready to evaluate the data, and the time it may take from the Pacific tsunami warning system to, someone doing something here is significant. And so we need to be careful that we invest in things that won't be obsolete because of that breakdown in that chain of command and decision making. We need sirens, I believe, because we could be at the beach during the day and we won't have, and we need to just get going. But we need in-house, in-home alerting systems as well. And as Councillor Brown says, and she's leads us in the modern technology, we need to take personal responsibility and get hooked up to things that can assist us as well. And we may have to buy some things that we put in our own houses if we are not prepared to rely upon the other systems that we provide as the council and ratepayers provide. It's not just a Papamoa issue, it's not just a Mount issue. We know that there are areas over here which are significantly at risk because the harbour can become a tsunami as well. And so areas of Matua and so on are just as vulnerable. So I look forward to the report.
Okay, so I'll put that all in favour, say aye, aye, against, so that's carried. Thanks very much. So DC 60, consequential actions for revised committee structure. And anybody want, Carlo who's going to, oh no.
Kia ora everybody, thank you Mr Mayor. Yeah, just introducing this topic. It's just in response to your guys' changes in the committee structure and some administrative items to tidy up, so I'll pass over to the team. Kia ora.
Afternoon everyone. So as indicated by Carlo, so this was coming back following the decisions you made in February this year and some of the consequential changes to implement those decisions. So as you'll see, there's noting some of the remuneration rates, just so for those where there are changes around chair or deputy chair, and also just noting that the Takawainga unit and Carlo will continue to work with Tangata Whenua around appointments to the committees. So we are then just seeking two decisions from you today. So approval of the draft terms of reference, and just there's an endorsement for the appointment on the Regional Transport Committee. So just probably before I start, apologies, there's a few typos in the report. I see in paragraph 12 we finished the sentence without completing it, so that should have legal and policy requirements full stop at the end of it, and there are a couple of typos in the terms of reference that have been pointed out to us. So if you note any others, please let us know. We'll make those changes before it goes live. So probably the key thing is the terms of reference. So that is going through the committee structures as proposed with those 4 new committees. Probably for sake of clarity, just reinforcing the view and some of the rationale behind some of the changes, from separating some of the strategic priorities for the organisation from more operational matters. So it does mean that some pieces of work or some things such as the CCO reports don't just go to one committee, so depending on where they are in the cycle. So at the planning stage, when we are considering the draft statements of intent or letters of expectation, that would go to the policy committee. At the 6 monthly chairperson's operational reports will go to the project services and operations committee, and then on anything financial or reviewing draft annual reports would go to the finance audit and risk. So just conscious that that change in how we are approaching the work program does mean that some things don't just naturally flow to one committee. And then the other document that we have attached at B, and I've kind of updated because we are conscious that there are a range of joint committees, external groups or committees, advisory panels where elected members may sit. So we were just trying to give a general guidance of where those might, if there were operational updates or elected members had been at any of those committees, where they may wish to report to, and it again will be dependent on the subject matter of whatever those groups were considering, but was just a start or some guidance about where they might logically feedback or report into. But I'll just hand that out as well. So probably open to any questions if there are questions about the documents.
Just before questions, I just wanted to apologise to Councillor Kurak, because in the subsequent changes, and certainly escaped my attention, and I didn't actually discuss it with him, and he was thanked for his service on the Regional Transport Committee without knowing that there was a change, so I had to apologise for that, and I accept responsibility because it's something I probably should have picked up, so sorry about getting that wrong, Rick. Questions?
I just note in the agenda as published, there's no reference to the Dive Crescent Governance Group nor the CCO Working Group, and I was just wondering for completeness whether those are included in the governance structure and the appointees and that sort of thing. And given we haven't, there's been a few changes to the committee structure and we haven't had an opportunity together to discuss the representatives, I was wondering, what would the implications be if we deferred this to another council meeting so that we could sort of have a chat about those changes like we did the changes to the committee structure? Would there be any fatal consequences for governance in this city if we did that, or where are we at? That's a long circulatorious way of asking a very simple question.
Well, the decision was already taken in February to the in-principle decisions, and that they would come into effect. So arguably that the decision was already taken. This was just trying to make corresponding changes to some of the documentation, and as I say, we were still just trying to get a complete picture because very conscious that there were some of those other groups that have either been established over the triennium or possibly disestablished, because again we've still been trying to find the main trunk line group, which at least I think we understand might have met sometime in 2016 or 17, but possibly doesn't need to be referenced anymore. So still just trying to tidy some of that up, and that will be a continuing piece of work ahead of the next triennium. So we're really clear about committees, other groups, and make sure it's clear in the governance structure going forward.
Through you, Worship. Look, I don't think there's any issue with deferring it, because by and large many of these decisions have been made and most of this is for your information. So the answer is no.
I'll just ask my questions, but I wouldn't mind hearing from Councillor Morris what the reason for deferring would be, what would be accomplished by that. But just in regard to the Dive Crescent Governance Group, I noticed that there is no page there for it, and I know we did have a terms of reference, and I think there's an MOU as well for the operation between the Otamataha Trust and Council. So at some point that should be included in here, I think. And I think with the CCO working group, there was also some terms of reference that were in the beginning of the triennium, which could be brought back, which may help to clarify its role.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't at the February meeting where these were discussed, but I just sort of feel in some regards we've gone over this perhaps very lightly or not thoroughly. The question I have is on page 14 with the Projects, Services and Operations Committee in the scope. It says about decisions on operational proposals and options and cost of projects, and I just wonder if that shouldn't be something that's put up before council, so it could be recommendations are made from that committee that go up to council, especially where it involves decision making on projects and costs. So I don't know what the rationale was for adding that into that committee.
I think because we're all on it, if I got that right. Yeah, so I think that was felt to be a double up, so that since we're all on that committee, there's that is really an effective decision of the full councillors. Yes.
Through Mr. Chair, if we've got suggested changes to the wording that sits in there, is that the appropriate time to talk about them now? Okay. Just with respect to the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, and the scope, the first line is monitor performance against approved long-term plan, etc. I feel that it should have the word financial in there, because some things will come through finance, audit and risk, and some things will come through projects and services and operations. So the monitoring of operational comes through PSO, whereas the financial comes through FAR. So just for clarity, it'd be good to have that clarified. just adding the word financial into the first line of scope, so monitor financial performance. Just separating it out from the operational perspective that goes through to PSO, just for clarity.
So the Finance Audit and Risk Committee will do financial and non-financial monitoring and reporting, particularly on the quarterly basis. So the quarterly reports, both financial and non-financial, will go through this committee. There will be a degree of, I think, probably more ad hoc and a different level of report monitoring or project monitoring, service level monitoring through the Projects and Service and Operations Committee, but the formal quarterly reports should go through the FAR Committee.
Also, we're missing terms of reference for Te Maru, Moa Joint Administration Board, and the Temporary Road Closure Committee doesn't have anyone to report to. The road safety says it's got 10 members, but there are 11 mentions, so we need to check that because it lists the 10 members that would be in that, but there's actually 11 listed. My question is for the likes of the CCO and their 6-month reporting, Main Streets, and other stakeholders normally report to us 6 monthly. Towards the end of last year, we asked for them to, instead of receiving a report with 3 lines, that we got their full report, and they came and spoke to their reports, which we all wanted to have occur so that we could have that face-to-face interaction with Tauranga Art Gallery, the Main Streets, T-Bop, etc. So there's no mention of them in these terms of reference. So how will they report back to us? Where will they report back? How frequently? And can they speak to their reports rather than being told they're being taken as read as they were last week?
So I don't know if Margaret wants to discuss this further, but as indicated, yes, I think we've heard that feedback from elected members that you do want the CCOs coming and presenting directly. So while Anne will provide a cover report, the proposal is that they would report through to the Project Services and Operations Committee on a 6-monthly basis, updating you on their work program and operational matters.
Yes, that's correct. On the 2nd of April, the CCO will actually present their own paper, their 6 monthly reports to elected members.
Not a question, but I'm prepared to move something when the appointed time is on.
I have a question or maybe a recommendation for a change, but I'm kind of waiting to see if we're going to lay it on the table because it would give us time to discuss it at another time. I'm just looking at the role for the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee, and whilst I perhaps should have seen this earlier, to develop a vision and pathway for the future of the city is a little bit too encompassing, I think, for that, because the vision for the city sits with council. I think to develop a strategy and pathway for the future urban form and transport network for the city is what I understand is the role of the committee that I will chair and Councillor Carrack will deputy chair. And if other members felt similarly, we don't have to do it now, but that's just a comment I'd make.
Okay, yes, Councillor Molloy, and then I'll go to Councillor Morris.
Just a confirmation that minor tweaking to this, like changing personnel around, if it meets the approval of the mayor and the councillors, that's not a problem. We just do it anyway. Is that correct?
Yes, that's fine. But it may well be, and Councillor Morris may move it, that to get this right, that we may let it lay on the table. We'll just see. And if so, then there is time. There'll be some sort of a process to get it right, so that we're not having to do it at a council meeting, which is less conducive to get everything right. Councillor Morris, did you want to?
Yeah, I move that the governance structure terms of reference manual lay on the table till another council meeting.
Second.
Now, no discussion on a motion to lay on the table, is there? So, So all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? So the ayes have it, and that's carried. So that'll lay on the table, and I don't know if you want to speak to it now, but the Chief Executive will put in place a process to so that you can contribute your ideas to this.
Yeah, through your worship. If council are happy, we will set up a process where you can provide feedback on the detail of these, just to make sure that we capture everybody's thoughts and views, and then we'll report that back and highlight any possible changes that we think appropriate at the next council meeting.
And then the next item is DC 52, adoption of the draft annual plan. And I guess you note C that it would be amending it, if passed, to remove the charge listed as spa and swimming pool registration fee. So, Jeremy, are you handling this?
Ever so briefly, if you want me to. This is obviously the culmination of 6 months' hard work by other people. I've got involved in the last 2 weeks. So if you want any information about the detail, then obviously Ben or the finance team are the best people to talk to about the details. But this is the end of this stage of the process, and we'll then venture into the community consultation phase and the hearings and deliberations before you decide to adopt in June.
Thank you, Jeremy. In C, the removal of the registration fee, and further in the report it refers to the inspection fees being maintained. Someone asked me yesterday about that, and I said we're looking at removing the registration fee, but then the person asked regarding inspection fees, so could you just clarify the position there, the current position?
Ray, are you itching to talk about this one?
Through you, Your Worship, the inspection fee is for re-inspections. It's nothing to do with the registration of the pool. So the re-inspection every 3 years, that's when the fee would be applied.
Do you know what that fee is every 3 years? Just so I can report back.
I think it's $136. Correct.
Thank you. Through the chair to Jeremy, with the consultation document, I believe we agreed we're going to add in where it says how to email or contact council, and I've put the phrase to our committee advisor so she's aware of it. If you wish to speak to your submission, please let us know. If day or evening suits you best, if that could just be added into the page where it says let us know what you think.
Yep. Yeah, we did agree, and I missed it on the QA. It's on page 19, the submission form, but we'll bring it back on page 6 as well. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Just a question probably to you, Paul, if I may, through the chair, on page 104, just the note at the bottom, some items from local authorities, fuel tax, fines, infringements, so that's been reclassified, and water by metre is now included under targeted rates. Can we just have a clarification of why that's being done?
Chair, I might just get Catherine to answer that one.
This is a funding impact statement, and there are kind of rules about what you present in what part, because it's standardised across the country, and so this is just a note for comparison with earlier years that we have had to move items. It's actually a hangover from, it's also in the LTP, but it's kind of covering people who look back on previous years and they'll see water meter revenue under user fees and wonder why there's been big movements.
Across the country, water, where there are water meters, the water meter is being changed into a target rate rather than just a cost or a charge.
Yes, wherever it, and water is normally charged under the rate.
just on page 153, which is in the consultation document, about the key issue, which is what all this hinges on, obviously, is exceeding the ratio, the debt to revenue ratio. I think it would certainly made it clear to councillors, as we've done over a number of years, is the graph that or the table that was used with the colours and the minuses with the red, hitting the red zone, so to speak. I just found that very powerful, and I'm just wondering why something like that, a graph or a diagram of some sort, would make it explicitly clear for the reader. We all absorb information in different ways, and I just feel that it would be much better communicated, a significant issue for our community. Instead of just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, it was some really very explicit diagram which sort of made the point.
Through the chair, just in response, I think what we're doing with this document is signaling very much around an annual plan process and not a 10-year plan process, and therefore that's why we haven't included those long-term charts effectively showing it, because there's a lot of work to do on those numbers before we actually get to that point, which is why I've restricted it very much around the annual plan and the 1920 year.
I've just got a list of a couple of questions. I'll just go through them by pages. Page 84 at the top, and we're talking about the rating calculations and lump sum contributions. At the top, we've got for the 2018-19 year, this rate will be, I would presume that we should have been 1920. Thank you. Page 95, at the top of this chart also with our rate samples. The rate samples impacted the rates for the year 18. We've used 18-19 again for the following 3 pages. Again, I would have thought that would have been we should be looking at 19-20 figures rather than probably just a carryover, but those, do they compare, where are the 1920s then?
About 6 lines further down.
Okay, can we maybe make that a little bit clearer, because it's really hard to read. Understand that they're comparative. Because you look at the heading and you think that it's all 18-19. The other question is perhaps more so from a ward councillor's perspective. I'd like to see street address used rather, or physical address used rather than postal, because you can then get a feel from your community what questions or what issues are affecting them. If they've got a postal address that may be completely out of town, or I don't know if you wanted to use both and make it optional, but I don't know how the other councillors feel about their own wards, but it may be more valuable to us to undertake where the mass of the information is coming from, where the large area of complaints are coming from, or if it's across the city quite broadly. But I'd like to see a physical address in there, either instead of or as well as. We don't write to them, so we don't need their postal address. Absolutely, but they could just put their suburb.
Sure, I mean, we can certainly include a line for the suburb there to get an indication of where some of these submissions are coming in from.
In terms of the red zone, when we talk about the later years, just wondering how and when the boundary changes, how they may affect, or when they may affect us, or will they affect that red zone that we're worried about in those later years.
Chair, if I can speak to that, when we've looked previously, the amount of rates from those areas are not significant. It will probably detrimentally affect that ratio later on when you put the infrastructure into service those as they move from current rural status to urban.
look for a mover and seconder. I'll move it. Thank you. In that case, I'll speak to it, and it's been a process that we've been going through for some time. I'm glad we're taking the time to try and get it right and make it as fair as possible when it goes out to the community for consultation, and I look forward to the community having their say and that being fed back to us. So that's all I have to say in moving it. Any other speakers? Councillor Baldock is second, or do you want to hold your fire? Other speakers? Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, through the chair. Also, I look forward to hearing back from the community. Things like resilience have added a large extra chunk in our budgets, and I'm sure everyone in the community's got their own different matter that is important to them, so I look forward to hearing from them.
Just want to make 6 brief points, if I may. Here we go.
You did say brief.
I think I'm really pleased with the consultation document. I think, and I thank staff, they've done a very good job putting this out. I think it is a timely consultation, because we're discussing reducing rates and whether that's acceptable to the community, and it gives us an opportunity to have a wider conversation, which I think is addressed in the consultation document. I want to say first of all, in the first page of it, that this one of the things that led to this was the recent revelation that there was possibly another $100 million of expenditure over the term of the long-term plan that would have to be factored in, and its impact on our debt ratios. I want to say that this is not a blowout in our budgets. That a blowout, technically or generally understood, is when you've budgeted for something, you've gone ahead and started doing it, and then somebody's miscalculated, or we simply have overspent and so on. This is something that has come because of the incredible rising costs of doing major projects, particularly like the Waiari and transport projects, and all the other wastewater and stormwater projects. So I just wanted to clarify that. The key issue in the consultation is yet we've lowered rates for this year in this draft, but this does not mean that we have solved the problem of the debt that we face out there in the current LTP. We know that we can address that at the next LTP. We have to, and we are able to carry on the way we are. So we don't want the community to think that we've given them a lower rate, we've chopped off quite a significant percentage and that everything's okay. It's not. Next year's rate, if we are to continue through that LTP, is an 8.6% rate rise. And we can't every year just keep chopping that back and asking staff to find more and more savings. We have to at some point address this issue, and it is time for a citywide conversation about this, I believe. Debt is our major challenge. We have to maintain those debt to revenue ratios in order to borrow more cheaply from the local government funding agency, and debt in a growing city is always going to be with us. I remember the 2013 election with some pain, as does Councillor Malloy, given that we were given a yellow card at that time. But one of the big issues of that election campaign was debt and how the council was out of control and so on. They brought the well-known expert Larry Mitchell to town, who compared us with the Kaipara Harbour, or the Kaipara District Council, and yet here we are 6 years later. We are still functioning, we are still solvent, we are still delivering for the community, but we are still having to manage debt. And it's the complexity of the issues on page 150 of our document that we need to address. there are some opportunities for us to address this with alternative funding models, alternative ways in which debt can be addressed, but because, as it says in the document, these are complex, they won't rescue us this year. They may deliver some answers next year, but there is still this underlying issue of, and the question that's posed in the consultation document is, what do we want to do? Do we want to reduce debt, or do we want to increase revenue, or a combination of both? And it's a serious conversation this city needs to have. We've operated for decades with this idea that we can keep rates low and we can promise these things in elections. But the reality for us as governors of the city is that we must make the right decisions, and sometimes they can be very, very tough decisions. Cutting costs eventually means we have to reduce levels of service, and if that's what the city wants, they should come and tell us loud and clear in this consultation, and we can work at doing that. But I believe the growing city we have demands a lot of facilities, and those are not nice to haves. They are things that the community asks us for a lot. Sporting facilities, cultural facilities, as well as the pipes and the basic infrastructure that supports the way we live, and having a good environment. You'll note in the financials, $60 million in this budget for depreciation alone. Every time we build something, every time we put a pipe in the ground, we have to depreciate for that item, and it's a huge percentage of what we have to rate for. So I hope people will look seriously into this. There's a third option, of course, of alternative revenue sources, but local government's been talking about that for a long, long time, since the Shand report. Another report's underway. The central government just does not seem to be willing to consider giving us that. It would be sensible to do so, but we don't ever seem to see much of that come about. So we have to work with what we have, which is basically a rating base, and to deliver what we need for the city. On page 159, a little quick reminder, which I love in this consultation document. More houses doesn't automatically mean more rates revenue for council. Instead, it means that we have a larger number of houses to divide the total rate requirement between. Encourage our community to take that on board. When you say you don't want growth because it's costing money, just bear in mind that some costs are here no matter how many people we have in the city, and if we don't have a growing city, we will find that the burden of that falls on a smaller number of people. I don't believe that's the answer. I think we should be thankful we have a growing city. There are many councils in this country which would love to have at least some of our problems, because with growth there becomes more opportunities, and I think we all benefit from a better lifestyle apart from the traffic and the congestion, which the new Urban Form and Transport Development Committee and the UFTI proposals we're working on with smart growth and so on, we're finally focusing on that important issue, and I believe as we address that and engage with central government on that, we'll see a way forward, though it won't be a short or a quick fix at all. But I do appreciate all the work that's been done, and I believe this is something we can be proud of to put out to the community, and I hope we hear from a broad range of people in the community, not just those who want to always keep the rates low and disregard the impacts that we have to deal with here from a growing city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in terms of communicating the issue, Councillor Baldock is right in terms of the issue facing the city. There is the challenge that we have in later years of the LTP in terms of getting an acceptable net debt to revenue ratio, and there are a number of ways to do that, and that is the debate I think that the city needs to have and hasn't really been having. It's so easy to focus on some of the minutiae, some of the smaller things which happen within our city, how much concrete is where potholes, that sort of thing. But this I saw on my way to work this morning a very large advertisement from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council asking people to have their say on their annual plan. And it's good that they're doing that, and I'd be the last person to criticise another authority, definitely. But I just wonder, in terms of how we engage with the community, if you see a sign or an advertisement or even a postcard in your letterbox which sort of says, have your say on our annual plan, it really doesn't pass the interest test for the normal resident, in my view. I think, yes, there is a statutory reference to this being an annual plan, but if we're to actually be to speak in normal parlance with our community, it's an annual budget. People know what a budget is. An annual plan has land use connotations which really aren't part of this at all. And so I wonder if in our communication with our community we actually reinforce to people that this is a budget. We are going to spend their money on these certain things this year. What are your thoughts on that, to quote my esteemed colleague, Councillor Granger? I think we need to be careful how we frame that. I'd also say, look, I mean, Tauranga is a place with many challenges. We are, in fact, the second highest rating city outside of Auckland in the country, and growth has had a big part to play in that. The reminder there is a good one that more houses don't necessarily mean more rates. However, whenever we're talking about rates increases, we always couch it as an net of growth. So in some ways we do have our cake and eat it too in some ways. That being said, I commend the work that's gone on behind the scenes. We are in effect a year behind schedule in terms of a substantive review of the net to debt revenue ratio and the impacts that this has on the city. There's been talk about the next council
think it's a lot of it's been said, so there's probably no much point in reiterating it. Just 2 points I would like to make is that I just like to us to also note that we are going against the professional advice of our staff. When we started the debate, is that we have a 2% debt retirement levy, and we have taken advice against that. So that's the first point. And the second point is that I will say facetiously, I don't really mean this in terms of a diagram that we should include in this, but what we could do is we could put a long and windy road, and we could have a picture of a boot, and we could actually have a can. And imagine the can, the boot kicking the can down the road, because effectively that's what this has happened. It's election year, we're going for a low, nice rates, 3.9%. It looks good, and we'll just leave the rest down the road to deal with in the future. So I do think it's kicking down the can. We're not taking the responsibilities that we should do now. We need to make hard decisions now so that our community is well resourced in the future. And quite frankly, I don't think we will.
Just briefly, and I do understand the word brief. Just picking up on Councillor Mason, my thoughts were before he commented that at 3.9% an ideal time for a debt retirement levy to start. I believe we are kicking the can down the road, and when you look at a lot of these projects, project delayed, it's all going to come back to us, and we're going to struggle to do it. And the other thing I'd quite like to comment on is if you look at the capital expenditure and what's going out for public consultation and our OPEX, I don't see too many nice to haves in there. I think we're very, very tight. We're probably too tight, and we should have been looking further ahead rather than just to next year or possibly even next September.
Brief right further ado, I'll put A, B, C, D, and E. All in favour say aye. Aye. And against. So that's carried. Thanks very much. Thanks to the staff. I know it's been a lot of work and been a lot of changes here and there. But, thank you for that. Now, going on to DC 53, Development Contributions Policy. Any questions on that? Quid pro quo rates, I suppose. Yes, Councillor.